This next section is called population growth. It is section 3.3. Now, population, we haven't necessarily given you a definition here, but if you write down, population is defined as the total number of people inhabiting a given space. The total number of people inhabiting a given space. When we talk about population growth and how many more people are inhabiting a given space, we're going to express that in a rate. So there's two different types of rates I'd like you to know about. We first of all have a crude birth rate and a crude death rate. So what the crude birth rate is, also know that acronym CBR, you'll see it both ways. It is the number of births per 1,000 people. So what we do is we take the average number of people born and we put them as a rate over 1,000. You can do the same thing with the number of deaths. For every 1,000 people, how many deaths are there? And that's why we refer to those as rates. Again, for every 1,000 people you have in your country or in your state or in your city, how many births are there? And for every 1,000 people, how many deaths are there? So we're going to talk about growth in regards to rates. So this is how you figure out the CBR. And the CDR as well, but let's take CBR for an example. You take the number of live births in a year. So this is the number of babies who are born in any given year. We're going to call that number B. We are going to divide it by the total population. So B divided by P. So you take the total number of births over the total number of people, and then you multiply it by 1,000. So again, here's a formula. You do need to make sure that you know this. For CBR is the number of births divided by the total population. You take that number and you multiply it by 1,000. Here's an example. 2007, there were 3,250 births in a city with a population of 223,000. Therefore, you take 3,250, you divide it by 223,000, and then you multiply it by 1,000. You might want to try this out on your calculator just so you kind of get a feel for it. When you get that, your CBR will be 14.57. So again, I know this doesn't mean anything necessarily by itself, but what we begin to do is we begin to compare the birth rates amongst different countries, and we look at that number and we see whether or not it's indicating a growth or a decline. We do this when we figure those out. Anything 30 over 1,000 is considered high. If you have 18 over 1,000, it's considered low. If the CBR is 20 out of 1,000, that would be similar to what the global CBR was in 2010. So that would be more considered a low birth rate, which means that your population is slowly growing. It is a positive number, so it is slowly growing. However, it is a low birth rate. So what are some things that would influence the birth rate, that would increase that to be higher or lower? Which things would influence birth rate? I'd like you to take a minute and jot down a couple of things that you think would influence the birth rate. And we're going to share these when we come back to class. So take a moment and I want you to brainstorm, what do you think would influence birth rate, either to make people want to have more births within a country, or that would hold people back from having more children within a country. Also, what might influence the death rate? What might be happening within a country that would make the death rate go up, or what would help the death rate to decline? What kind of medical advances might there be that actually prevent deaths from happening? Kind of think of all kinds of things. Think about the situations within a country. So what we look at overall when we take both the crude birth rates and the crude death rate is the natural rate of increase. Or in some cases, if deaths outweigh the births, it would be a natural decrease rate. We're not going to say that. We're just going to say it's a negative increase. So if there's a negative increase, that means that your population is going to be declining over time. This is how you figure out the NIR. The NIR is births minus deaths in a population. The births minus the deaths in a population. So you would take the birth rate minus the death rate, and that would give you the NIR. The NIR usually accounts for the greatest amount of growth. We don't generally look at migration. We're not going to say the population grew or declined due to migration. Usually the NIR is changing because of the birth rate. While there are populations that migrate in and out of countries, generally speaking, we're going to look at the natural increase rate to see if population has grown or declined. Lastly, before we finish this section, let's talk about growth and doubling time. So doubling time is the number of years, pretty obvious, the number of years it takes for the population to double. Now you might want to know, well, why would we care? Well, we definitely want to make sure that we can make provisions for our populations. If we know that our population is going to be doubling in the next 10 years, we want to make sure that we are providing for the people we have and making provisions for the people that we are going to have. Recall that you take CBR minus CDR, divide by 10, and that's going to give you your NIR. Here's a look at Egypt. So their CBR was 25, their CDR was 6. You do 25 minus 6, you get 19. Divide by 10, it's 1.9. So I don't know if we looked at this calculation earlier, but make sure that you know this formula for figuring out the NIR. What's going to happen is we're going to take the NIR to make some predictions. Doubling time will be according to this. If your NIR is around 1%, your population will take 78 years to double. So you have a while. That could be a positive thing and both a negative thing. If you're looking to find more people to come into your country to be workers, or if you want a future of people who are going to be working to employ our elderly, then 78 years is a long time to wait for those births to happen and for people to fill in those spots. If your NIR is around 2%, it will double in about 35 years. So down here, we go back to that example of Egypt. We said that Egypt's NIR was 1.9%. When will its population double? Well, 1.9% is about 2%, so it's going to be 35 years. If you take 2018 and you added 35 years to it, Egypt's population will double by the year 2053. So that's going to be helpful for us to understand how many people are currently there, how many people do we need to find out for the future. In the next 35 years, what are provisions the government should be looking into? What kind of jobs should we be looking into having in order to provide for those people? If your NIR is closer to 3%, it will take 23 years to double. So of course, the NIR is the natural increase rate. So if that rate is high, if it's a high percentage, obviously we're going to double a lot faster. Those are our methods for calculating population growth.